Hello everyone. This is another interesting video where we will talk about Chat GPT. So I've been, playing around with Next.js and TypeScript, trying to, do things, and I've just tried to make a, I would say, complete portfolio website. And again, it is under progress. So there's a lot of things that's happening around. Okay, and I've set up some analytics. Then I've set some live chatting functionalities where one can authenticate, send email, and do all those kind of things. But let's not go into the details. So there is a lot of things that's going on, and it's not about what this website is about. I just wanted to give you a context of everything, and then I started using Chat GPT suggested by one of my friends. So I was just looking into how effective it is, and I have to say that it is pretty impressive compared to GitHub Copilot. Like if I give you an example, so here I have some components, and you see whenever it is visible, it triggers visible work experience. And then on the top, I'm just using it's visible, but then I have blogs and all that, and contacts and projects, awards, testimonials, and everything. So so there are a lot of synthetic events happening using JavaScript listeners, intersection APIs. In case if you're not familiar with intersection API, I have covered it in a lot of my previous tutorial videos where you can detect browser tab switching, closing, and then there is window on blur event listener, and then we have event listener for visibility change. So there's a lot of things that is going on. Okay, and so for that reason, I was trying to see how effectively Chat GPT can generate code for me. And here you will see step by step how like in the first time it didn't give me exact code that I needed, but with proper commands and everything, it was very helpful in generating what exactly I needed. So for example, here I asked to add an event listener to React functional component. If you look at my question carefully, what I want is that there is a functional component. In this case, it's my component, and I want to add an event listener to this. So here is how it responded. So it says it just did this import React and all that, and then it had this use effect, and then you can see that it is adding event listener to the document. And I hope you have figured it out. What's wrong with this code? So basically, this means that anything that happens within the document, I asked it to have an event listener for React functional component, and then it gave me for whole document, which is something that I didn't want, but just wait and see the next step. So once I was and then it gives a really good comprehensive information about, like, is a hook that allows to synchronize a component with an external system. It takes, and I mean, if you give it a read, you will get to learn a lot about concepts and everything, and I think that is very useful. So in this example, we use to add click event listener document and all that. And when the click occurs, we also return statement to remove the event listener, which is a good practice. So let's say you have a document, I mean, you've added a or subscribed to an event listener, and let's say you want to remove it once the component unmounts. So that cleanup is important, and that all the good practices it's following already. Okay, and the empty array passed in the second argument of tells React to only run the effect after the initial render, which ensures that the event listener is only added once to the document and not multiple times. So this was first response, and then I asked, just I was confused. I was not sure if it is exactly because maybe this document refers to this component only. So I just asked, would this not add the listener to the whole document instead of the specific component, because I wanted to have it on the React functional component. And by the response it gave, I was totally impressed. So so if I would be using GitHub Copilot, maybe I'll be switching suggestions and I'll keep on getting same suggestions again and again. But in case of Chat GPT, it's saying yes, that's correct. In the example I provided, the event listener is added to the entire document, okay, and not the specific component handle click. So it will be called whenever a click event occurs in anywhere on the page and not just within the component. So you can see that the explanations are pretty clear. It's very solid and it's very straightforward to understand. The language is very clean and clear and precise. So that is one thing that is really great about it. And if you want to limit the scope of event listener to the component, you can use the ref attribute to create a reference of the component's DOM node and attach the event listener to that instead. Okay, so this is how it's also, it's just not, it just didn't answer my question that what is the problem, but it also suggested me an alternate solution to the same, which is really great. I mean, this is something that I would very, very appreciate for ChatGPT compared to all other AI programming tools. So here it says that you do the import and then you create a use ref hook using a reference using use ref hook. I hope you are familiar with use ref hook. In very simple terms, it keeps a reference of the component that you want to track, and you can do a lot of things. So here you can see that we are using use effect, and once the component mounts, it's adding an event listener click, and then once it unmounts, it's removing that, and then handle click is like this, and then it is adding this reference so that it can keep a track of it. Okay, so this is one thing that I would say that it could also have checked if ref.current, basically just to see if the current reference exists or not, but it has done in the later stage. So that is one thing that I would say could have been improved, because that makes code more predictable, nothing else. And in the example we use, use ref hook to create reference to the component DOM node. We attach the event listener to the ref.current, which may or may not be defined, and that's why it is safer to, if I show you one example, let me see somewhere it used. Okay, it's basically it's something like this. So let's say you take the let's say you take the ref sorry current, you take out the ref and you make sure it is defined. So you have to have, something like an if condition, and then only you do all this processing that it is doing directly, add event listener and everything. Although this would not cause any issue, but this is, it makes it more readable and more cleaner in case in future you do some more complicated things. It is safer to use it like that. Okay. So then it says here's an example how so it gave me the answer. Okay, then I wanted to use it for the visibility, because you can see, right, I wanted to use it as an analytics tool. So whenever something is visible, I wanted to trigger that. Okay, so for that purpose I asked it to check the visibility of the current ref. Okay, now it totally deviated from this. I mean, of course this is not a wrong solution, but it gave me something for different solution, which is using intersection API. Okay, so here it gave me this functional component. It used intersection observer, which I was already using earlier. So I had, if I show you the visibility handler that I'm using. So there are two visibility handlers. One is using intersection API to, check for the threshold and accordingly make things visible or not. And then I created a light version, because in this one I don't wanted to use intersection API, and I tried to make things more and more simple here. I'll tell you why. But intersection API is basically, it will keep on observing this, and that is something I don't want. It's basically one time effect. Once the user sees the page, that's it. I don't want to re-trigger it. Like, let's say for example, if I go here and let's say if I go to the top, you can see it's visible basically refers to this section of the page, and if I go back and come up, it again triggers it. That is something, it may be required for different use cases, and depending upon different types of things. But if it is not required, then in that case, you want to keep it very optimized, and you don't want to bundle a lot of JavaScripts to the client to make your page more performant. So I didn't want to use intersection API, but it gave me an example, intersection dot intersecting and all. And the component that I created, I added some additional things that I wanted to check for the threshold, visibility threshold, and there's a default value, root margin, etc., etc. But it in this case, because I just asked for intersection, so it gave me this solution, to which and it didn't it was explaining something, but then I think I paused it or something, because I knew how it is working, and this is something I didn't want. So then I asked, I only want to get the visibility using ref variable and not intersection observer API. So you can see that it pretty much understands plain English very well. I don't have to use any coding terminologies, although I have to be as specific as possible. So when I specified it, it says, you can use get bounding client rectangle, which was a new concept to me. I mean, I never used this, to find the coordinates of a particular ref and then try to analyze it with the window inner height and width to check if it is visible or not. Okay, so it's saying that this is how you do it. And you can see that this is, I mean, code is pretty readable and it is very understandable how it is doing it. So it's checking top, left, and all these coordinates, extreme coordinates, and based on that, it is giving you the feedback. Okay, and then these comprehensive explanations, that is something I would say you definitely give it a read, because that will make you even better, to understand what are the complications, what are the limitations of this approach, and everything it will give you. So here, if you see in this example, this is called use effect to check visibility of the element when component is mounted. Okay, so it is telling you what are the end users. Like, if the component is not mounted at first place, then it won't work, because it is triggered using use effect. And then it says it is also called whenever a window scroll event is fired. So to check if the visibility, whenever visibility happens when the user scrolls. And then it explains this method get bounding client rect and everything. And then it says it is important to note that this approach only checks for the visibility based on the position of the element and does not take into account other factors such as whether the element is obscured by other elements on the page or not. Okay, so what does this mean? Let's say, you have your component, like let's say here I have work experience, and if I click on next, so you can see that there is a spinner that came in for certain period of time, right? So basically it says that the spinner that you saw, it was actually obscuring your component, but this particular approach would not detect that part, whether it is covered or not. So this is also very important, to understand that, okay, these are the limitations that it tells you. So it's always worth, giving it a read. And then I asked, is it possible to trigger the event only once? I mean, of course it is possible, but you want to see all the approaches that this chat GPT would suggest to, have a better understanding, clarity of the idea and everything. And that will help you cover it properly. Okay, like what exactly it thinks, and then you can have a better, even optimize the solution. So you can see that from the starting, it gave me a code, and then we are trying to refine it to make it the best possible code, so that, we get the best solution possible and accordingly proceed with it. I mean, the solution it is giving is 100% correct for generic cases, but you can see it does not have 100% context of what I want to do. Like, whatever it has suggested, the events will trigger infinite times whenever, but for me, I want to trigger it only once, because there's no point of triggering it again and again. Okay, the page is visible, I know it is visible. Now next time it is visible, I don't care, I have already recorded it, right? So that is why I have asked this. And it says yes, it is possible to check event only once, and there's a lot of ways. It is suggesting one of the way is using state variable, which is the first thing that will come to your mind. I mean, you also have used it a lot of times to check for any kind of, status and everything. So it is saying the same thing, and run the only event only the once. Okay, so here it has used this has triggered state, and once it is triggered, it sets it to true, and then because it will always not of this will be false. So this condition would never run. But there is a very important miss here. If you see, I this line should have been in this if condition, because only when the element is visible, I want to trigger it and not otherwise. What it will do is that this will trigger this function once when the scroll happens, and it will set it to true, and after that it will never trigger it, which is something I don't want. So you have to understand it. You don't, you just don't copy paste the code as it is. And that is why these platforms, at least for now, can be used to the best as tools. It can make you a better developer. It can help you learn new things like this one, which I was totally unaware of. But at the same time, you have to take ownership and responsibility of the code that you write to make it more optimized. Like, let's say if I had to search, and I had to do a lot of forum search documentation and everything, and then I had to find, okay, this is the way to check if a reference is visible or not. However, this, it gave me that out of the box. Now I can focus on the bigger problems, like how to make this component as optimized as possible and as performant as possible. So here I found that, okay, this is something that I don't need, so I have to place it in here. Okay. And then again, after looking at this code, I see that although this will trigger only once, but the event listener is still there. So that will also take some memory and performance, which I don't want. Like, once it is triggered, I don't care about event listener also, right? So that is what I asked it. So it gives me this cool explanation that use state will help to keep track, and check visibility has triggered is to false. So when true, then check the visibility and it will log the message. Since check visibility is wrapped inside use effect, re-entering will not change has triggered variable and all that explanation. And it is important to note that if you want to trigger the event again after some specific condition, you will have to reset the hash triggered function to false. Okay. So it is, this point is very important, because it is mentioning that in any conditional situation where you want to trigger this again, then you should have that condition, and then you have to call this function again to false, so that it can be re-triggered, because in this case it will only run once. Okay. So then I was fine. Okay, this is fine. Then I asked, why don't you remove event listener once hash triggered becomes true? Okay, and you can see there's a typo in my word, but it still detects it. Then it says that hash triggered variable, instead of the event listener, it will continue to be active, will be checking for visibility on every scroll event, which is what I was discussing here. So looking at the code, you could figure it out. Whenever the component unmounts, then only it is removing the event listener, right? So it's saying that it will continue on every scroll event, even though the event will only be triggered once. Removing the event listener would be a good idea in this case, as it will prevent unnecessary processing and improve the performance of the application. Here is an example on how to do this. Okay. So you can see this piece of code. And again, here the same mistake which I was talking about earlier. And although it said that it has removed the event listener once the event is triggered, but it has not changed that code. I'm not sure if this is a bug or something, but you can clearly see that remove event listener is only in this part of the code. Rest all is, as it is, which is something I don't want. Okay, so this particular mistake has not been corrected. It can be some bug or due to something, but that's why again I repeat that you have to read the code carefully, understand what it does, and then only use it for your use case. Okay, so it says in this example, I added the event listener to variable listener and then pass this variable function, so that the same listener will which we added can be removed. This way, only once event is triggered, listener will be removed, and the function will not be checking for visibility on every scroll event anymore, which improves the performance of the application. Okay, so although it is saying a valid thing, but it has not done it here. It is only removing it once the component unmounts in the return statement. So anyways, I was not concerned about this. And then I asked, now there's one more scope of optimization. See, think carefully. Do we really need this? Because we want this to be triggered only when the component is visible. In this line of code, the element is visible. So once this executes, we are done. We can just add a window.remove event listener directly here, because we don't care what happens after that. Once this line reaches, we are done. We can remove the event listener. In fact, we can remove this visibility functionality also, but in very simple terms, at least we can remove event listener directly here. So that is what I asked. Why are you using a use state variable? Wouldn't it be safe to remove event listener directly with the visibility is triggered for the very first time? Now, why did I say wouldn't it be safe? Because I want to, let's say there can be some complication which I may not be considering. Okay, and that is where it could help me. It could tell me, okay, this is a scenario where your component will show unexpected behavior, and that is why it is best practice to use a use state variable, because there can be any possibility. And for that reason, I asked this question, and then it said that in the specific example, it would be specific. See, its wordings are very specific and clear. Like for this example, only for this example, it would be safe to remove the event listener for the first time without using a state variable. And then here it corrects everything. So here you can see that it removes the event listener directly here, and now we are not using any state. So now we are totally safe, and this is what my final code I wanted. Now this is very, very, I would say, optimized one, although it still has this add event listener. So there should be one return statement just to be super safe, because let's say tomorrow you create a component and then it mounts and unmounts. In those scenarios, you want to remove the event listener in those cases also. Let's say this component, this if I give you a live example, let's say I have a bottom footer and I apply it to this, and let's say user never visits bottom footer, and it opens a pop-up or something, or just this whole component unmounts, footer component unmounts for some reason. So in those cases also, I want to remove event listener, and that is the reason why it is important to treat it that way. So there should be a remove event listener here as well in a return statement. Okay, and then we are good. Everything else is fine for me. So then it explains function is called inside check visibility to remove. It is not this way the event restrict only one. This removing the and then this way the event restrict only once removing thus improving the performance of the application. And in case be unnecessary, but it is important to consider other factors such as you want to achieve or if there is a need to of this variable. So it also says that in case if you want to have that variable, then in that case you must need that, but in this case it is totally safe, and of course I'm not going to need that variable anyway. So this was one of the good conversations with Chat GPT where it helped me understand new concepts, it helped me explore possibilities, and it had answers to all my questions. It improved my code, and that is why I am very very impressed with this tool, and I will recommend people using it, but with sense of accountability and responsibility of your code. It should not be a copy paste kind of thing. You should use this tool. You should write optimized code. You should use it as a tool to make your code better, and not totally kick your logical sense out of the equation, because there's a lot of things, improvisations, optimizations, and context that you have that this application may not be having. In future, maybe that is also going to be possible. The way AI is progressing, nothing can be said. But again, there would be the problems that you can solve and optimize with your thought process using tools like these. So that's all for this video. I hope you liked it. I am planning, and in case if you are curious about how to build in this application, I've used a lot of front end, back end authorization concepts and everything. See a lot of CSS actually, and basically some authentication mechanism. And so, if in case you are interested, let me know if you want to have a series on this. And yeah, we can go ahead with that also. This is like a full stack application where you will get to learn a lot of things. So yeah, that's all for this video. Thank you very much. If you have any comments, feedback, or questions, feel free to add in the comments, and have a great day.